Non-white, non-black, not well, non-belonging, no walls, no borders, non-Western, now bleak, neo-colonialism wretches, neoliberalism breaks. The neighbor's pond presses against the steel mesh fence that prescribes a border which may not be crossed without permission. Bending a few centimeters into the threshold of the yard within which I'm authorized to stand, the fence determines two sides of one ground, mine to its left, and the neighbor's towards the opposite direction. The purpose for which the fence is conventionally used is what causes it to become what it does. A thing that borders, demarcates, cuts across lands, divides the commons, and differentiates inside from outside. Functionality gives meaning to the fence. The object embodies a gesture, and in turn, the logic invested in its becoming matter tends to be thoughtlessly taken for granted. My companion cat habitually jumps over the fence in order to drink from the water that the pond's enclosures prevent from spilling. The cat does not acknowledge the fence in the same way it is socially perceived. Human animals know that fence is fence. For this reason, it matters to note that the symbology of the object is unthinkable for the cat, which obviously tells us more about humans than it does about cats. It matters that one attunes to the fact that precisely because of the unthinkability of the symbol in how the cat makes sense of the world, the cat goes on. It crosses over, drinks from the neighbor's pond, and pees on both sides. Neighbor originates from the confluence of the Old English adverb nigh, meaning near, and the Proto-Germanic geber, meaning dweller. Boje, the root meaning of boer, means to be, exist, grow, and derives from the Sanskrit bhava, meaning becoming. The etymology of neighbor suggests a sort of shared movement towards the becomings of complementary parts. In relational closeness, neighbors are conceptually those in the course of growing near each other. Neighbors exist through their neighboring contingents. Close dwellers, perhaps dwelling on common ground. With this information in mind, I turn to the Google Earth view of my neighborhood, searching for the friendliness in neighbor. I seek enlightenment in the distant vantage point. I follow the failed promise of a detached self-image that top-down satellite perspectives are presumed to provide. My house is located in a street on the west side of the city of Amsterdam, the Witte de Withstraat, a street which is predominantly inhabited by non-native Dutch persons whose multiple reasons to be, exist, grow in a North European country are specified by either one of two possible designations. Until its ban in late 2016, the Netherlands had been using two terms to describe the Dutch population in official documents and social scientific policy research. Autochtoon, autochthonous, literally meaning emerging from the soil, and its untranslatable antonym, allochtoon, meaning those who emerge from elsewhere. Despite what the term suggests, allochtoon was not applied to every person born outside of Holland, for example, the German, British, or US American, but it was specifically used to describe first and second generations of people of non-Western origin. Because of its racist and xenophobic connotations, the term has been target of extensive criticism. It remains in predominant use by the Dutch society, regardless. The social dynamic of the Witte de Withstraat reflects the national neoliberal politics with regard to social justice. The street acts as a molecular model resembling its large connective web. Weighed by a false meritocratic scale, my body becomes a wobbly pointer between the time-based markers of immigrant and/or expatriate, according to who gets to decide how to act towards me. Researching the different meanings of these markers, I find that expatriate is a signifier for whoever lives outside of their native country. Immigrant, then, becomes an expatriate who's here to stay. It does, however, remain unclear to me how the question of time and permanence gets to be defined in this blurry logic. For somebody who might or might not wish to stay, but who is in fact staying here, how much time does it take for that time to become enough? When is it not enough? And when does in-between time become too much to take in? Committing to a logic of progressive time, enormous investments are required so that one may become part of a here. But time-based markers turn into obvious signifiers of privilege, as it concerns the intersections of race, gender, and class. All I have to do is walk a few steps out of my front door to be reminded of this. The street undergoes a conspicuous process of gentrification, in which matters of race and class have been constantly involved. And yet the trendy hostel a few meters to my left has placed on its terrace a replica of local street signs with the message, Witte de Withstraat, written upon it. A literal translation of the Dutch street name into the mother tongue of globalization. A message that seems to suggest that within such a space, racial differentiation is a concept that has already been so long ago dealt with as to allow for it to be wittily addressed and capitalized on. Regardless of the underlying intentions borne by the sign, the message is nuanced by the fact that the Witte business is invariably frequented by customers who share the specific ethnicity it bespeaks. Customers who also seem to feel welcome at the Café White Label, which has opened its doors a few streets away. Like fences, the appearance of human skin tends to function socially as yet another kind of demarcation line. On the basis of the meanings that pertain to skin, it differs in from out, self from other, and us from them. If I center this logic in my body's experience, I see that the non-white, non-black skin that to some extent prevents my organs, bones, blood, bacteria, and waters from spilling, at times implicitly grants me access to a certain level of hospitality. At other times it does not. But certainly the right to be, exist, grow in nearness is a vague permission which gifts itself the authority necessary for deciding when and why it might be withdrawn. A vague offer of hospitality reorganizes the affective terrains of personhood according to a sense of guesthood. And this type of thinking is a naturalized paradigm which tends to be forgotten. Yet a sense of guesthood inherently requests a certain level of docility from the part of a guest towards its host, an obedience to systems that might tolerate quieted strangeness, but also one which could easily refuse to do so. Good guests shush, bad guests out. Witte de Withstraat, aka Witte de Withstraat. Mine is a 750 meters long street that was and remains named in homage to my ultimate host, a Dutch settler who colonized the people, natural resources, more than human animals and lands where I was brought into becoming. And yet, even if rootedness is a conceptualization of a feeling that might only provide a transitory sense of belonging, it is now here where I heal my wounds. It is in his street where I more often than not find refuge. It is in his street where I sleep, or nothing at all. It is in his street where I eat, fuck, write, think, hurt, and muddle. It is in his street where I bleed a blood unwished for. In his street I care, and am cared in return. In his street I learn to share. In his street I shed my hairs, skins, and waters. In his street I mold selves that no longer matter. In his street I trade sanity for consciousness. His street is where I hug, argue, work, create, caress, fear, depress, panic, refuse, grieve, overcome, persist in making worlds otherwise, through crooked methodologies. In his street I cry saudades and sink along. In his street my body-mind is too frail not to tear upon another minimum wage job too many. In his street my guise is inside out. In his street I am so exhausted. His street is where I liberate ongoingness from hope's numbness. In his street I struggle not to forget, but how do you sustain your rejection to obedience? In his street I must refuse benefiting from systems of epistemic violence on the basis of my skin's non-blackness, my cis-passingness, my fake ableness, my expatness. In his street I cannot afford the joy of imagining futures untied to pasts. It is in his street where I long, I become, I belong, I mourn losing my tongue. In his street I chant, no matter whose street, this street too is my own. Zooming down from the broad satellite view towards my house, the image unveils a long strip of land that has been cut into equally sized rectangles of backyard garden. The plus symbol to be clicked in order to zoom into the image turns opaque upon reaching the standardized limit. As much as the fence, the virtual limit informs that from this point onwards, there are legal privacy boundaries that may not be crossed. The frozen image stares back and stares. I do not recognize my garden. Looking through eyes that are not my own, I see the shape of things that seem to have been shoved to the sides, but the blurriness of the image forbids their recognition. I can remember stains, scratches, and cracks which are no longer visible. Perhaps the aerial shot might date to a few years back, when I lived elsewhere. Who could have been living here then? And under which conditions did they live? Google's footnote dates the image to the Gregorian year in which I write this text. According to that information, this is my garden. Could it be that some familiar objects have been erased from the image? Or from my memory? The point of view seems like an attempt to confuse and homogenize my own knowledge of things. As if I'm being taught a warped, flattened version of my own intimate reality. Not that top-down representations of reality are entirely unreal. Hegemonic narratives become reality. They bind embodied knowledges to one single account. They erase possibilities of deviation. but pushing up against the enclosures of a prescriptive image, boundless knowledge is persistently stray. Unspoken histories are planted in my temporary, pixelated soils. Spit, sweat, desires, and tears fertilize the berries I harvest each summer. They reside in every bit of me, in every drop of goo on the skins of my giant friends, slugs and toads. They nurture the apples that renounce ripening for surrendering to parakeets' pangs of hunger. And yet, the garden looks different. Empty. Perhaps devoid of life. Perhaps devoid of me.